Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to yet another edition of the Lambom Show. Today is Monday, February 15th, 2021, and we are on the third session of our series on men and mental health. Today we are going to be talking about communication. How do men communicate? By the way, happy belated Valentine's Day. Yesterday, February 14th, the world over, many people celebrated Valentine's Day. Gifts were exchanged, words were exchanged, and in all this, we're communicating. Our broadcast today, our session today is going to focus on how we can improve on relationships by improving on our communication skills. Communication, what is that? And I just want to put it very bluntly that there is a close affinity, a close relationship between communication and communion. Communion, a common union. To be able to establish that common union, there needs to be communication. And very often we use words or we use gifts or both. And even in our silence, when we are not saying anything, we are communicating. But let's talk about words. Words are the most obvious form of communicating. And because they can be very, very deceptive, we don't always mean what we say, and we don't always say what we mean. Lots of relationships have gotten into problems. My husband has never told me, I love you. And even when they say, I love you, what does that even mean? What do words convey? How about gifts? The flowers, are they enough? For some, it is flowers. For others, it needs to be something big. But in all this, we have to struggle to understand what to communicate, how to communicate. And for this, as always, I remain eternally grateful to Coach BK, who's going to lead us through this conversation, who's going to help us understand as men how to communicate. What are some of the issues that we face and how we can overcome this? BK, happy Valentine's Day. How did you spend?
It was amazing. Thank you, Lambert. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, brilliant. Happy Valentine's Day, and it's great to be here. Yes, so where do we go from here?
So it is Valentine's Day. The question of communication, and I'm sure a lot of communication took place yesterday, even when people thought they were not communicating, even in their silence. And I'm wondering, I was on Divine Chamukong's show last night, which had to talk about relationships and Valentine's Day and all this. And one of the things that came out, I asked is Valentine's Day a day when men are supposed to communicate their love to women and the women only have to respond, or it is that we can both communicate in different ways and still get to the same point? I don't know. What do you think?
That's an interesting question. You see, I'm glad you asked because we're communicating all the time. Let us start with looking at the word. So, I mean, what is communication? I'd like to start by looking at what you and I are doing, for instance. Notice that we show up and we trust that who we are will be enough. We just show up and we have a conversation and we take it, we let it go where it needs to go. So it takes us back to that whole concept of just showing up as who you are and trusting that you would be enough. Now, in the context of communication, if we were to plow this back into the whole concept of communication is trying or working to express what it is we're feeling at any point in time. It is working to express our thoughts. We want to get across to the other person what it is we mean, what it is we're trying to convey, why we want to convey it, and the impact that we want it to have. Now, that would be a very rough definition of communication. But then how do we communicate? Obviously, we communicate using words. But then what are words again? You would notice that words are containers. Words are containers that do their very utmost best to capture intent and to capture meaning, and then to convey that meaning to our interlocutor, the person who's listening to us, the person we seek to influence, or the person we seek to collaborate with. Because when two people come together, the whole essence is to exchange energies and to build synergy. The whole essence is to move from a place of maybe chaos to a place of harmony, or to move from a place of harmony to a place where they build and make a difference and serve a greater good, to a place where moving from misunderstanding to understanding, moving from a place of void to a place of knowledge, a place of emptiness to a place of fulfillment. That is the purpose of communication. But now, if you look at it by and large, now you ask the question, Valentine's Day. There's a lot to pick apart here. But when we look at Valentine's Day, for instance, to come back to the question that you asked, is it a day when men communicate? You highlighted a very important point there. Communication happens all the time, for starters. So whether we're talking or we are not talking, we are communicating, because in our silence, that silence is interpreted to mean something. If you and I do not get along, if you and I, for instance, do not get along, and I walk into a room and I am silent, automatically you start assuming the worst, especially if you are not confident in yourself. You start wondering what I could possibly be thinking about you. And every act, every muscle twitch, every expression on my face, you give it meaning, and it's not always going to be the meaning that I had. So you notice that even in silence, we are communicating. We are talking to ourselves. We are trying to project. And a lot of the time in that communication, we assume what the person is saying based on our worst fears. So in communication, the last thing that you want to do is, quote unquote, shut up because you think you have nothing to say. Because even that carries its own meaning. You have those who would think, oh, they're not saying anything because they have nothing to say. Is it because they're stupid? Is it because they don't feel confident? Is it because they don't know what to say? Is it because they know what they want to say, but they don't know how to say it? What is the problem? Are they feeling like they do not belong? Are they waiting to be invited? So you notice that even in your silence, you would have said so many different things. Again, your body language is very important. Now, I want to talk about or impress upon the different types of communication. Obviously, the most important medium or instrument of communication. When you think communication, the first thing that everyone thinks about would be words, because they are the carriers. But then, how effective are these words in actually conveying our message, the thing that we want to say? So words add an added burden, an added layer to the process of communication, because the way you understand words will not be the way I understand my own words. So if two people are communicating, a man is communicating to a woman, what is it that makes a man engage in that communication in the first place? You will notice that when do men communicate? Men communicate when they feel like they are in control, when they feel like they know and can walk their talk. Because a man wants to know that he is authority. He wants to know that, well, he's in control. He wants to know that He knows what he is doing. He likes to know that he has a command of the territory. So if he's not sure of what it is he's doing, he'd rather not say anything for fear of making a fool of himself. So what does he do? He moves away, or he becomes he gets impatient.
So,
Were
BK,
you going to say something?
yes, I appreciate that. And again, I think it's important to, I think that's one layer of the communication in terms of men wanting to, once they are confident, comfortable, sure of command of they have control.
Mm-hmm.
But isn't it the fact too that when you have, every time you say something to your partner, your wife, you have been criticized, you fear, out of fear, I mean, fear may not be the right word, you get to a point where you think that silence is better than saying anything, just because you think that it's not because you don't have control. You find one way of getting control over the other person by just saying, hey, whatever happens, I know what I'm going to do next. I don't care what the other person is saying. I'm going to shut up just for the sake of peace, but which is a false sense of peace, because you just do not want things to escalate. You leave it and just shut up, but you already know what to do next. Isn't that a typical mindset of a man? Because women generally, 2 weeks ago, you used the example here of two women walk into a bathroom as strangers and they come out best friends. And two friends, male friends, walk into a bathroom and you are wondering whether these two guys know themselves, isn't it? Because we are not that, it's not, um, men do not just talk like that, let me put it that way. And so even when you come down to something like gossiping, it is something that unfortunately is affiliated more with women than men, even though these days it seems as if men are overtaking the women. But that is because women are generally prone to communication. They want to communicate, even not just in words, even in feeling. Am I wrong?
Well, you're not wrong. Um, Again, as with everything else, it is multifaceted, it is multi-layered. What is the purpose of communicating? It is engaging the other party in a social enterprise. What is the purpose of that social enterprise? Again, we'll come back to building synergies. So if you're going to not communicate with someone who's looking to communicate with you, and your end game and end goal is peace, how do you define peace? So you notice we're beginning to get into the nuances of communication, the complexities that underline this process, and the complications, the ramifications that come off it. You have one person who thinks that if they shut up, it means peace. They're doing it for the sake of peace. You have the other person who thinks if you shut up, you're ignoring them. So they feel ignored. They feel worthless. Would you have achieved what it is you're trying to achieve, what it is you're working towards? See, that's the question. You don't talk about communication until two parties are involved and the terms of engagement are agreed upon. Am I making sense there?
Absolutely, and I think that's a dilemma you face, isn't it? Just with that particular example, one person shuts up, thinking that they are
Mm-hmm.
working for peace. They just want to make, but the other person is also feeling ignored. So where do you find where's the middle ground? How do you
All right.
resolve that?
Yeah, so that's a good thing because basically it's a great question. What does that tell you? It tells you there's an impasse. It tells you you have two people who are looking for different things. It tells you you have two people who are going in different directions. Because what is it? What is the thing that would bring two people to a table, and then one would not want to communicate? Where are they going? What exactly is it are they trying to achieve? You know, you talked, for instance, about insecurities, which I highlighted. Now, if you don't feel comfortable about the subject, if you don't feel like you're going in the same direction, if you don't feel like you know what it is you're talking about, if you don't feel like you've got full control of the situation, then that fear of making a fool of yourself makes you shut up, so to speak. You hold your peace. Or, to take the example that you actually gave, you're talking to someone, and each time you try to communicate, you are talked down. Now, why would the person who's talking you down talk you down? Do you then stop and ask what it is you're doing wrong? Or do you hold your peace in the name of peace? Do you hold your peace because you don't want trouble? But then again, if you are, whatever it is you do to avoid, you end up achieving what it is you were looking to avoid. Let me say that again. Whenever you try to not achieve, what you're focusing on is your fear, and that is the energy that you attract. Say you don't want to cause trouble. The focus, your mental focus is trouble. You cannot not do. So because you're focusing on trouble, it's like being on a say you're on a tightrope and it's raised really high. Obviously, if I ask you to walk that tightrope, your focus will be on not falling. But because that is what you focus on, you may end up falling. Whereas if your focus had been on walking that tightrope, then you concentrate on what it is you're trying to do and you would do it seamlessly. Or crossing the road, for instance, if you're crossing a very busy road, just to give an example. If you are afraid that you may be hit by a car, that fear could make you close your eyes and run across the road and hope that nothing happens. So it is the fear that makes you close your eyes. But if you focus on what it is you were trying to do, which is get across to the other side of the road, then what do? You pay attention, you look at what is happening, you make an assessment, you analyze, you validate, you qualify, and then you take steps that will get you to the other end. And again, if you're not sure in a conversation, if you don't want to be shut down and you're not asking questions, you would rather, again, hold your peace. What does that demonstrate? What does that suggest? It suggests that there's no connection between you and the person you are trying to communicate with. I would like for you to maybe give us some of these scenarios, give examples of situations where one person is communicating with the other and they are so to speak shut down. What is it that would lead to that? Have you had that experience? Do you know someone who has had that experience? Because it's easier to talk to specific case scenarios.
So, welcome, Mr. Erica Kenji. Before I come to you to answer to you, BK, Mr. Erica Kenji, greetings to you, Pambom. Thank you. Dear Shane Gante, thank you. And Mr. Gante was on a Divine Show yesterday, and he actually sent me something that I'm going to share. But he has indicated already. So men use communication as the way to leverage their strengths and vulnerabilities in a way that places them in a position of relative advantage to the other party. I mean, I don't think it's being competitive. It's not. We're not in a competition, isn't it? So when you say relative advantage to the other party, it seems to want to say that you are projecting something instead of there's a message you want to get the other person to understand probably why this thing happened in the first place. Why did I do it in the first place? This is the reason. So you asked me for an example, and let me use this to say, so you have done something wrong. Your wife is pointing that out to you that, hey, that thing that you did, I don't feel comfortable with it. And you are trying to explain that, listen, this is the reason why I did this. I am sorry. Okay. Now, in an instance of you coming home late, let me put it late in terms of you are leaving work, you're supposed to come home to help the kids, and you do it once, twice, thrice, then you're explaining that no, it's not as if I am coming home late. It's just that I'm having much more to do at this time. I should have been here, but this is it. And you apologize and you come back to it again a second time, a third time. So all of a sudden, it becomes a problem where the other person is not seeking to understand where you are coming from, but only wants you to adhere to something that they want. And because of that, you decide, okay, I'm no longer going to have this conversation. Okay. If every time I apologize, you say, I don't want to be listening to that apology because it's repetitive, I don't want to continue apologizing. So what do? I shut up. I am not, to use Ngante say, I'm not leveraging anything. I'm not. There's nothing that I'm leveraging here. Strengths, maybe vulnerabilities, okay, but in a certain way, I'm not trying to place myself in a relative advantage to the other party. I'm just trying to explain why this is happening and hope that I can draw the other person in to see that this is this may be a problem, but hey, that's not where I'm coming from. I don't know whether that makes sense. I might be rambling there.
No, you make sense. And we'll look at both scenarios. So you've talked of a scenario where you've done the same thing. So you keep doing the same thing over and over and you expect different results. I think Einstein rightly calls that insanity. Now, it's in a situation like that, clearly you can see that there is a deadlock. Clearly you can see that you have not communicated enough. You have spoken. There is a difference between speaking, which is using words, and communicating. Because until the other person has understood you, you have not communicated. So communication means what it is I intend to transmit has gone across, it has been received and understood, and I have had or received feedback or counter feedback that confirms that my message went across. That is the way I define communication. And the responsibility and the honors is on the person who is communicating to ensure that what it is they're trying to pass on has been understood. So if I say, sweetheart, this is what's happening, or I'm late because this happened. First time round, and she's okay with it. Second time round, same excuse. Third time round, same excuse. The question I'd ask you, Lambert, is the following. Did you know that you were going to be late? And at what point did you realize that you were going to be late? Having realized that you were running late, when did you take the decision to actually inform your spouse? You see, because if you take your spouse for granted, which is what you would have done, you may not realize it because you expect her to understand. No, she's not in your head. She's not with you to see what is going on in your space. So she can't just project and feel your pain just because you're going through pain. And women expect that a lot of the time. We expect women to just understand things. I know they are even women tend to be even worse at this particular ploy of expecting men to understand what's going on in their heads. You almost have to be a psychologist, I know, but our focus is not women. So women have a free pass as far as we're concerned, because we're here to build men up. We want solid, robust, bulletproof, watertight men that women can rely on for strength, since we claim to be strong. That is what you and I are all about. And we want to build men, get them to that place where we're not afraid to be vulnerable. So let's come back to that example. When did you realize you were running late? Having realized that you were running late, how soon did you reach out to inform your wife that, okay, she shouldn't count on you? Because if she's counting on you, it's almost like a domino effect. If one thing doesn't happen, a whole host of things will not happen. And that is her frustration. Do you see that side of her pain? Chances are you don't. So she's expressing frustration. It has nothing to do with the fact that you've done or repeated the same mistake a million or a gazillion times. It is everything to do with the fact that you did not take her into consideration. You did not realize that if you made a commitment to doing something, then she built your contribution into the dynamic or framework of things. And so thought or assumed she would be able to take care of other things. Now, if you're not there to take care of whatever it is you're doing, her entire evening would fall apart. Are you aware of that? No. Does she communicate it? Absolutely not. Because she's at a point where she feels taken for granted. And if in her mind, what you have actually communicated, because communication comes in several guises, there is verbal communication and there is non-verbal communication. And even within that gambit, there are lots of other options, lots of other routes you can go through. When we talk about communication, we can use words, which are not the most effective way of communicating. Feelings are a whole lot better, but we can't always feel what the other person is feeling. Thoughts are equally better than words, but we can't always read people's minds. We are not mind readers. And that's what makes communication very challenging, because we try to capture our thoughts and our feelings and translate those into words and then transmit that across to the person we're talking to. Now that is a Herculean task. You need to have a certain mastery of words. You need to be able to paint a picture with words to get someone to a place where they know exactly what it is you're trying to say, and they can feel the message as opposed to just listen to the words. So of course, again, when you communicate, how are you communicating? You see, we looked at one facet, and that first facet was, when did you let her know? Out of respect and courtesy, because women believe in courtesy a lot. And I'm sure you would agree with me. Some of the expressions you would have heard would be, or in that scenario, some of the expressions you would hear would be something along the lines of, couldn't you have the decency or the courtesy to let me know? And would she not be in her rights, well within her rights, to say that to you? Of course she would be. Now the problem is, once anger sets in or impatience sets in, she doesn't explain that to you, because again, she expects you to know. And why shouldn't we know? Because if the tables were turned around, obviously we would expect to be informed if something was out of place, and we would make a fuss about it. You and I know that. So isn't it hilarious that when we turn the tables around and it is the spouse on the other end, on the receiving end, we expect her to understand that if we didn't do what we said we were going to do, it's because we got held up. We don't think it is necessary for us to communicate that simple detail. We take it for granted. Why should we? What is it within us that makes us think they should just understand? You see, because again, communicating it is validating the way they feel. And women want their feelings validated. It helps us connect. And then it helps you two, or my spouse and I, if it were between the two of us, it helps us plan and coordinate more together. You come and you give an excuse, and all you do is bring excuses home. Now, Lambert, you tell me, if all we serve our spouses are excuses, what do we want them to do with these excuses? What if we showed up at home and she said, sorry, I couldn't cook because you didn't hold her end of the bargain, or sorry, you didn't hold your end, or I didn't hold my end of the bargain, so she didn't cook the meal she was actually cooking. But I shouldn't worry. She understands that I couldn't, live up to that bargain. I couldn't tick my own box. So it meant she couldn't tick her box. Would I be okay with the fact that there was no dinner? Would you be, Lambert?
Absolutely not. And again, I believe that I get the point about taking the other person for granted, which is a very big issue, because at times you think that the two of you have become so much united that the other person understands where you are coming from. It is that presumption of, hey, why is this person not understanding me when we have been together all this while? What is it that this person is not getting? Okay, which is a big issue, and I really want to thank Ndiashin Gante, because he sent me something, and you have touched a lot about it. Is that aspect of listening? Because in communication, most of us do not listen. Okay, we'll come to that. Your question was, in that aspect of, you presume that the other person is going to understand, and when you flip it, very often, I think men tend to understand a lot when their women don't do a few things. I mean, that's my general take. We It is precisely because we understand that we presume that the women too should understand us. Isn't it?
I think when it comes to being intuitive, women are a lot more intuitive. Understanding, let me see what Gandhi just put up. So you have indicated that man would shut up, and when they feel they are weak. Is it not true that when he feels weak or afraid, he makes it up by projecting a facade to prevent you from knowing the truth? Poker face? Absolutely. Now, that is 100% true. And this will introduce the concept neatly. It will neatly and seamlessly introduce the concept of vulnerability. But let's finish with what we were talking about. So I think by and large, women are more understanding of their men. Women they make excuses for men a whole lot more. And that is the nature of the woman's love, to excuse her man, to pamper him. In fact, and not discipline him where she would very readily discipline her child. I'm sure you would agree with me.
Yes.
So, and if we agree that that is how women are, and don't forget, they are the ones who are nurturing. They are the ones who nurse our kids. They're the ones who carry our kids for what, 9 months. So naturally, it goes without saying, they are more patient. And the person who is more patient will be more predisposed to understanding and will be more inclined to accepting abuse until it becomes unbearable. And I'm sure you would agree with me that before a woman gets to a place where she starts retorting, where she starts fighting back, in quotes, is because she just can't take it. She can't take it anymore. She can't make anymore. She can't make excuses for us anymore. Because we have our routines and we believe that if something worked yesterday, again, this speaks to communication. We believe that if something worked yesterday, it should work today and it should work tomorrow. We don't realize that people do not work that way. So what's the tendency? I like the statement that was made just now. The fact that men will then come up with this poker face when they feel challenged, they don't have a rebuttal, and they don't know where to run and hide. Next thing is a counterattack. Oh, by the way, the other day you did this as well. And that's usually the way it would go. That's the way that dance would go. Anything to avoid saying, I'm sorry. We're not very good at that. Women usually don't have a problem. A woman who's in love doesn't have a problem saying she's sorry. And if you are married to a woman who has a problem saying they're sorry, then
Yeah, sorry on their behalf.
no, let's just say lots of conversations need to be had. We need to get in there and figure out what exactly you've done to this woman. But yes.
So again, I have to. Unfortunately, this is a long one. So since communication is an interaction between two parties, with the senders aiming to influence the receiver, therefore, the sender finds the optimal platform and methods to exchange so that the receiver is influenced in the manner the sender intended. I was going deeper, nuanced because of my understanding of the topic tonight. I think that is, yes, that is so true, isn't it? The sender and the receiver and the sender looking for a platform and all that. The challenge here is, I think there has been a breakdown already. Okay, there's a breakdown already in that. So the messages, the way the message from the sender to the receiver, it becomes an issue. How would you now, within the context of a problem, send a message to the receiver in such a way that the receiver should be disposed to receive the message?
Okay. So there are two questions there. There is the question that Giante, was it? Sorry, what was his name? Was that Giante?
No, Ngante.
Gante.
Yeah, Ndiache Ngante.
Yes, exactly. So if you look at the context of that question, it's coming from a place of manipulation. Yes, I know influence is a much better perspective. So it's a much better way of coining the exact same thing. See, because communication really should be back and forth. You want to communicate an idea. You want to, yes, you may want, obviously, ultimately, you're influencing. But as long as you're not doing it to get your way, as long as you're doing it for the interest of both parties, and I'd like to add one thing here. So when we communicate, the whole experience can feel good. It can be good for us, and it can serve the greater good. So there's always going to be a litmus test. So when you're influencing, are you influencing because you want to serve the greater good and enhance the relationship? Or is it because you just want to get what it is you want out of that social enterprise? Are you negotiating your way, or are you building the relationship? Because in every relationship, there are three entities involved: the two parties, and then there is the bond. There are the two parties, as in you and I, and then there is the relationship, which is the connection. And that's a separate entity. So I can be acting in my interest, I can be acting in your interest, and I can be acting in the interest of the connection or the bond that exists between us, and that is the actual relationship. What do I mean by this? Let's decompose, let's pick it apart, let's deconstruct it. If I'm acting in my interest, I'm being egoistic, obviously. I just want to have my way. I want to get my way. Is it sex I'm looking for? You name it. I do whatever it is I need to do to ensure that it happens that night. Is it I want to go out with my friends? I will do whatever I need to do, wash the dishes, give you a massage. Now that is disingenuous, because my intentions are, well, my intentions are not, they're not particularly clean. If I won't do the dishes every day and give you that massage every day, even when there's no football game to go to, even when there's no hanging out with friends to do, if I can't do that on a regular basis, I only do that when I want something from you, I'm exploiting you. And obviously, I'm exploiting the relationship. On the other hand, if I'm serving you at my own expense, so I let you get away with murder for the sake of peace, I just don't want trouble, I don't want any problems. I'm serving you at my expense. But when I look at doing what is right for you and for me, building synergies, that's the way I like to put it, because in as far as I'm concerned, we are all just energy. And we interact, we gel to build synergy or to end up with chaos, if you listen to chaos theory. So I'm either acting on my behalf at your expense, acting on your behalf at my expense, or acting for the relationship. Of course, if I'm serving my interest or serving your interest at my expense, then the relationship suffers. But I just broke it down into these three entities to demonstrate benefit, to demonstrate the fact that at any point in time, one or the other or all three entities are benefiting. And ideally, you want to establish that communication in such a way that everybody, so the relationship thrives, the connection thrives. Because if the connection is thriving, then you and I are thriving with it, since both of us are at the opposite ends of that connection and that interaction.
So while I agree with you, and I think Ngante agrees with you, it says on point, 1 + 1 = 3, and you have the win-win, the win-loss, and the loss-win situation. I think that's what you are getting into. I also want to point out the fact that the basic rule of human survival. I mean, I have to love myself first. That is why it says love the other as you love yourself, isn't it? So in everything I'm doing, I'm putting myself, isn't it? That is why I will do it to benefit me. If you are doing it to benefit you, hey, what is the problem with that? I don't. Isn't it in you doing it to build yourself? As you build yourself, I'll obviously build the entire relationship. And I get the point about the fact of I just want to do the dishes today so that I can get permission to go and go watch a game. But why should it even come to a point where I have to be negotiating a football game, which is something I like? Why don't you allow me within this context to just do the things that I like, even though you may not like them?
Because in a social enterprise, there's no talk of me. You as an individual cease to exist. And we've broached this subject in so many different ways. Don't forget that. The concept of me does not exist until I start interacting and engaging with you. And that is how I define that whole concept of me. It is my interaction with you that gives me a definition. That's what gives me purpose, because it brings out who I am, and then I can define myself based on how I serve you. So if I start talking about me and doing what I want, excuse me, remind me again, why did I marry you? If I was going to come into this relationship and only focus on me, my interests. That is why you talk about dependency, independency, or sorry, yeah, dependency, independence, and interdependence. So when you're independent, of course, you can you take care of self. It starts with being dependent, where you are learning to take care of self. And then you become independent. And that independence means now you can take care of self. Obviously, if you can't take care of yourself, there's no way you can take care of someone else. And then you move to a stronger position, which is interdependency, where you collaborate with someone for the interest of the community. In this case, the community is the family. So if you're doing anything that is self-serving, then you're exploiting the family. And there's this yin yang thing. Whatever you do will cause a ripple effect, and there will be a problem somewhere, as long as the intent behind what you were doing was not conducive and beneficial to everyone that was involved. You asked the question, how do we get to a place where, how do we get to that point where what I do is subject to scrutiny? Why don't you just let me do what it is I want to do? We got to that place because over time, you would only engage. See, because what we practice is what we become. You would only engage out of guilt because that is what you had practiced. So you only do that when you want something. So it is again a mindset, and it's not exactly a growth mindset. So you're engaging when you want something, and each time you want something, you make sure you give something in return. That's trade by barter, and I call it prostitution. It's actually whoring. So you're actually whoring with your spouse. When you want something, you give something, then you take what you want. That's not the essence of a relationship.
That's kind of interesting to say that one can be prostituting with a wife. But again, I want to welcome Mr. Judos again. He says, talking honestly and openly won't necessarily rescue a troubled relationship, but doing so can clarify whether one can and should be rescued. Communicating in this sense is a process of both connection and self-discovery.
Absolutely. That is beautiful, Jude. I love that. I mean, we could talk all day about this particular point. It brings me to my theory and philosophy of life, which is that life is about relating. And it is in relating, as Jude says, rightly so, that we get to understand who we are, because life is going to throw all these curveballs at us. And these curveballs come in different shapes and guises. They come as our children, they come as our spouses, they come as our siblings, they come as friends, they come as strangers, and they show up as enemies as well. And the challenge is, do you have the wherewithal to grow within the constraints that interaction presents? Can you filter and find an ethic or a set of values, ethics, morals, and ethos that allow you to operate in a way that safeguards your integrity, regardless of what is happening around you? When you look at the lotus flower, for instance, so you've got this beautiful white, golden white flower that shoots out of a out of the slumps, and you begin to wonder, how does it do it? How do you end up with so much beauty in such a decrepit environment? And you realize it is not beautiful in spite of its environment. It is actually beautiful because of its environment. So it is naturally beautiful. It doesn't matter what is happening around it. It learns, and what's the expression I'm looking for? Whatever challenges it meets, those challenges bring out the very best of it, its best essence. And at all times, it glows. And that's exactly what relationships are designed to do, by and large, to help us grow, to help us come to a place where, regardless of what's happening around us, regardless of what is happening around us, we remain, and sustain this whole concept of being resourceful. Our resourcefulness does not depend on what is happening around us. Our resourcefulness depends on what is happening within us. And as long as we are in control of what is happening within us, then that empowers us to control whatever it is that's going on around us.
That is the best way to qualify the conversation. Great conversation, says Jane Shitty, following the series. Now, BK, I want us to, again, we have in our discussions, we have gone back and forth, but there's something about this communication which, like I said, Ngante mentioned something to me like he sent me something which I found fascinating. We talked here about the recipient and we talked about the sender. So I have to send information and I have the recipient to understand what I am sending over. And we have gone back and forth, talked about the wind thing, and all that. But don't we have a burden? The recipient should also have a burden of trying to understand, which gets down to the point of listening, which is the hardest part. So it's not just about me sending across a message, but it's also for the person who is receiving to be able to dispose themselves in a way that they can receive the message, which means listening. And I believe that one of the greatest acts of aggression in relationship is the absence of the ability to listen.
I'm with you, stock, lock and barrel, hook, line and sinker. It still doesn't get us off the hook. You see, this is where it begins to sound like I'm a feminist. And hey, look at it from this perspective, Lambert. You are responsible for your communication. There is no way I can hear what you have not said. It doesn't matter how hard I listen. So if you tell me that my spouse has got the responsibility to clarify what she has not understood, Lambert, there's a lot of shuffling. I'm not sure where it's coming from. Papers are paper and yeah. So
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So if I just lost my train of thought. Oh yeah. If I'm communicating with my wife, of course, or with a spouse, or with an interlocutor, since we're talking about men and women, I'll keep it to husbands and their wives. Of course, it is my wife's responsibility or our spouse's responsibility to ensure that they check for what it is they heard, clarify, seek understanding, and ask questions where there are ambiguities. But I've never really known women not to be in a position where they want to understand, or where they're seeking understanding and trying to clarify. What I tend to understand more, or what I tend to pick up more, are men who get frustrated because they were not understood. And in fact, they think that repeating themselves is a weakness. And I know where it comes from. See, because again, if somebody says, I don't understand what you're saying, what do they typically get? Are you stupid? Are you dumb? What do you want me to do? Do you want me to draw a picture? When really it is the man feeling incompetent It is the man feeling incompetent about his inability to communicate succinctly enough and seamlessly for his wife to understand. And that's what it is. Because I'm sure you would agree with me that women generally are by far better communicators than men. And you can see this generally, obviously. I say this in a general sense. When it comes to language, we all come from Africa. Say we travel from Africa and we come abroad, we go to all these different European countries, including the US, out west. When you go to Germany and you listen to the women speak German, you realize that they almost speak German they speak German with a German accent. It is crisp. They really speak like they do as the Romans do. You go to the US, you notice it's the same thing. When the women speak, it's almost like, all right, they have learned not just the language, not just the syntax and the semantics, but they have picked up the accent as well. Some of them, sometimes we will make fun of these people. Oh, you are quote unquote rapping, trying to sound like you were born. And I say to myself, this is again shallow thinking. You see, because if speaking that way, if learning to speak that way means I will be better understood, absolutely, I will do that. So I'm better understood. But we always find ways of seeing derogation in even the most positive of things. Whereas we men can't always do that. So as in we, male, the male, we can't always do that. It doesn't matter how hard we try. You will know that, okay, there's some foreign accent there. And so it speaks again to communication. Women, by and large, generally, are better communicators. And because of the confidence that they bring to the table when they communicate, they are easygoing. They are freelance. We are the ones who get tied in nuts and bolts, worrying how we come across and whether we will be able to convey our message. You see, talking is a bit like lovemaking. It's a dance. I make one move, you make the next move. We move to the left, we move to the right, and then we gel. So it's a feeling thing. You're communicating, you're exchanging words, but it's almost like you are in a dance and it flows. And if you can do that, you realize that communication happens and adopts a completely different pedestal. You communicate at a whole different level. But if you can't do that, then communication suffers. And that will always happen if there is no connection. Because once you connect, you realize that words just begin to flow. The communication runs itself. You don't have to strain. You don't have to stress. You don't have to push too hard. You don't have to work hard. In fact, there are times when silence will just happen. And in the mid or amid that silence, most of the communication actually takes place. And that is the beauty of that dance. That is the beauty of that engagement. When the
No, Vicky, I mean, I came in just because I'm sorry that I cut you off at that
it's
point.
okay.
When you talk about communication as a dance, that is so important. And even before that, I now understand why my thick African accent has remained this way, even though I've been in this country for so long. And a girl who comes in a few days is able to like get into it and is able to articulate within that. And maybe that's because of their very nature. We are just stubborn creatures because hey, there's nothing wrong with the way I speak, isn't it? I'm not trying to rap in any way. But that fact of a dance, you go left, you go right, that says it all. That is why, like I said in my intro, when a man tells a woman, I love you, it's like you have put on a flower, something, you have just touched a flower and it opens up. And a woman says, I've been married for all this while and my husband has never told me this. And you are wondering, why is it a problem that don't I do things to show you that I love you? Why must I say it before it becomes a reality? Why? Why must I do that? The little acts of love that I do, that's enough proof But I think in this communication, if we understood it as a dance, that there are things that you have to move together in order to accomplish a certain result, that is going to be helpful. And I really thank you for, articulating. And let me just say this. Thanks for this opportunity. This is Gante, thanks for this opportunity to discuss this topic. This is great, learning a lot. But let me go further because you said something. Jude mentioned something earlier on about honesty, isn't it? And Gante says something that I want us to get into. Honesty and understanding in a relationship are different components. Communication in the relationship flows from one, understanding of the situation, and two, an honest intent to remedy it. This is why I say somehow we select the platform and method based on the two. We choose words, timing, body language, etc., based on the intent to influence. And because you mentioned it before, I'm wondering, I want to have sex with my wife, but I realize that I have to play some gymnastics in order to have that, isn't it? So that is why I have to go and clean the dishes that night. I don't see what is wrong with that. Am I not communicating? Isn't it? I've chosen a platform. Okay, what is the platform? To wash dishes in a bid to communicate something to her. Does it happen that way? No. Am I manipulating? Maybe I see that when I wash dishes is pleasing to her, and because that is pleasing to her, that is why I've chosen to do that. Is there anything wrong with that?
There's everything wrong with that, my dear brother and friend. You're exploiting the living daylights out of this poor woman. And she knows that she's being abused. Used and abused. I will take it to that. I will stretch it to that point. So it brings me back to the ultimate question. I mean, you asked two questions. So there was the one about love. You have done lots of things to show her that you love her. Notice that we tend to see the world as we are, not as the world is. So you tend to give what you would want to receive when you want to feel loved. You're forgetting that if you were to find a mirror image of yourself, you might as well go marry yourself. You married someone who was different from you, someone you complemented. The right hand and the left hand are mirror images of each other. So they look alike, but they are polar opposites, which means they'll have different characteristics. If you had two right hands, you would struggle. If you had two left hands, you would struggle. If you had two left feet or two right feet, you would struggle. There's that complementarity that comes into play. And if you've got that complementarity, then do not expect that the way you seek to receive things is the way your spouse will receive them. So while you're doing the things that will mean everything to you, like a man typically wants to provide a roof over a woman's head, and he thinks, "Oh, I'm providing shelter and protection." But what about that man whose spouse is working and earning enough, which means she can actually have a house? If she were kicked out, she would have her own place. So you're killing yourself trying to give her something that she can give herself, and the thing she really wants from you, which is that love expressed in the dance. And that communication is part of that dance. You see, because when we talk about communicating, men tend to be very perfunctory. We tend to be too dogmatic. We tend to be too structural, too functional. We use communication strictly to convey a message. Dot, 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 dot. We might as well use Morse code. Men would be happy if they could use Morse code to communicate and use as few words as possible. So you tend to hear a lot of this from men. Oh, I'm a man of few words. Oh, it just means you can't communicate. No offense, obviously. I mean this in a light-hearted way. Obviously, I'm not gonna disrespect anybody. Some people generally don't like to talk a whole lot, so they minimize what they want to be. They want to be seamless. They want to be succinct. They want to use as few words as possible to pack in a lot of meaning and to get their message across. So there are no misunderstandings, because the more you talk, the more you open up that avenue for misunderstandings. But then again, we're talking more about how communication is sent and how it is received, and different people have got different modalities. Some people are kinesthetic. They want to be touched. They want to feel you. So it doesn't matter what you do. If you don't touch them, they don't feel like you're communicating. They don't feel like you care. Some other person wants you to buy them roses. That is the way they appreciate that conversation. And it's not the rose flower itself. It's the fact that you went out of your way to a shop which is not on your way home. So you thought, you must have thought about her. Then you went to that shop. You put yourself through all that trouble, bought the rose flower, came home and handed it to her. She may take that flower and do nothing with it and even bin it, but she would love you for eternity. Now, if you had been communicating with your wife, obviously, and you were interested in your wife, then at some point you will understand that is the way she communicates. That is how you can fulfill her. Because relationships, like life, it's all about fulfillment. I want to be at my best. I want you to be at your best. If you're operating at your best and I'm operating at my best, then together we can be our best. When 1 + 1 ceases to be 2, it becomes 4. Synergy is born. Otherwise, we have chaos where 1 + 1 cancels itself out and we have divorce at the end of the year. So it's either that, it's either we're building synergy or we're moving towards chaos.
So we have Ngante said 1 + 1 = 3, which is the point you made before about the man wanting to do something for the woman, okay, so that they can build that bond, isn't it? The 1 + 1 = 3. And today we are saying there's a situation where 1 + 1 = 0, which is the divorce you're talking about. But I want to use the example you just gave.
Yeah.
The man goes out of his way to get a flower to the wife because he knows that that is what the wife wants, isn't it?
Yes.
But that is also in order to satisfy himself that he has done this and may negotiate some sex that night. What is wrong with that? And this is the way Ngante puts it. I really prefer to see influence as a positive outcome for the third entity, the relationship, rather than simply to satisfy me.
Amen.
This is where it differs from manipulations. Every communication is supposed to be aimed to influence the other for the good of all. And this is what I'm saying. The sex is not just for me, because when I have sex, the woman too is satisfied, even though she may not have wanted it at the time. I've brought home a flower. I've given her a flower, and because of the flower, we have sex. I get satisfied. She too is satisfied. How is that manipulation?
Here's the thing. And this is where intent means everything between and betwixt. It's not the sort of thing, Lambert, that you and I can judge. There's no KPI. There's no measure that you can put to it. It's always the person who's perpetrating the action. And they are the only ones who know why they do what they do and the thing that drives them. So if your intent is to satisfy your carnal desires, the lizard in you, then that is manipulation. And over time, it will result to this chaos theory. 1 + 1 = 0. Because with time, you will become more and more callous in your in the way you do it. You will become more and more abusive because, hey, don't forget, thought is energy. Energy follows thought. What you practice is who and what you become. So when you repeat that cycle over time, the finessing will drop. At some point, you will use abusive language to get what you want. Oh, who do you think you are? By the way, remember, you're not the only fish out here. Next thing, I go and I sleep with someone out there, you will say, I've done this. And when I come home, you're not going to satisfy me. Before long, you will be tired of this charade and it will move to the next level. And that always, almost invariably and inevitably happens. Initially, you put yourself through that trouble. But because your intention was selfish, you will grow in your selfishness. It gathers mass, it gathers force, and that is who you eventually become. And that's the beginning of abuse. The seed of abuse would have been sown. It's just a matter of time for it to grow and produce fruit. While we're on that subject, let's talk about the other modules of communication. We've talked about the person who's tactile. They want to feel you. You need to touch them, and you see them all the time. They talk and they touch you. It's like they can't get their hands off you. Men and women alike. And so these are the telltale signs. You don't need to be an expert to see them. If your wife is talking to you and all the time she's touching you, you know that is the way she will express love. That is the way she wants to receive love. She wants to be touched. Some other person is very vocal, as in it's about words. They want to hear you say it. They want you to look at them in the eye and tell them, baby, I love you. And then say it like you mean it. Don't be telling someone you love them and you're watching the TV. Remote control in one hand, glass of beer in the other hand, TV on. Say, oh yeah, baby, I love you. You would notice you would have said it, but you haven't said a single thing. You would have, in fact, you would have insulted her. She may not react to it, but she knows where she's going to get you. And when she gets you, you will feel hurt, but you wouldn't know what happened. See, because how does she tell you that, sweetheart, you just insulted me? And then you turn around and you make her feel stupid. I just told you that I love you and you say I insulted you. What is wrong with you? What do you want? And then she feels really stupid. So she's not going to say it because she can't defend it. How do you defend something like that? She is very right, but there are no words. The words have not been discovered yet on this planet that she could use to point out how insensitive you just were and not feel vulnerable or not feel stupid and not have it thrown back at her face. Then, of course, there's the person who wants to taste everything. If you want to communicate love to them, it is through the food. Just cook good food. And they will know that, oh, yes, this woman really loves me. I came home to my fufukon and janja. You know? So just as you have got your perks, just as you have got your quirks, and she figured out what it is that makes you tick, you equally have the honors and the responsibility to find out how you communicate. Because don't forget, it doesn't matter. Whatever it is you do with your wife, your spouse, is communication. Is it lovemaking? It is, again, communication. The beauty of lovemaking is the fact that words get in the way of that communication. Feelings do the talking. And if you can navigate those waters, then the words find themselves and then they express themselves. You don't need to look for them. You don't need to seek them. They find you. And again, that is communication. And it has got its own intent to solidify the relationship. It builds the love that you two have cultivated over time, brings it to fruition, gets you two to a place where you don't need to talk to each other in order to understand what the other person is thinking. You just jump into the fray, come into a scene, and each person, just with one look, each person knows exactly what it is they're doing because you've become one at levels where your spirit just understands what the other spirit is doing. And it just becomes a dance. You're tidying the house, and before one person thinks about one thing, the other person is doing it. Before you want to communicate the other thing to the other person, they are doing it, and you just look at each other and you smile. And with that smile, the expression, how did you know, is what you're saying to each other. Then you smile again and life goes on. Now, that is communication at its finest.
Do these things happen in real life, or you are just giving us some theories?
Oh, well, I must say, I can only talk about my experiences, right? So, do they happen? Of course they do. You just have to learn the dance.
Exactly, and that is the point I wanted to point to because you mentioned discovering the recipient. What is the language that is best understood by the recipient? We always have to. So again, back to the point I said, Ngante said to me, okay, about communicating and the role of the listener. We also have to figure out how the listener listens, isn't it? That is what the point you are making here. If somebody is feeling type, you have to communicate in a way that, that is how they understand love, isn't it? If they are like me, who come home to a good dish of corn fufu and kati kati, okay. And again, that has to be, I love the thing you said about the intent. And I wanted to just run through a couple of comments. Evelyn Chong, thank you. The 10, I think she was saying, men tend to have this village in their head that is hard to break. And she says 1 + 1 = 3. Ngante says, in a relationship, the man must be unique, the woman must be unique, and the relationship is also unique. So 1 + 1 is, in my opinion, always 3. Yes. Evelyn says, buying flowers with the intent of just showering her your love and care is great. But doing it because you have something in mind is called manipulation. And that seed of manipulation will grow to hate because she will also notice it. Ngante agrees with her. Jude, if you are looking, let me put that up. If you are looking for a relationship therapist, you don't need to look beyond your keyboard. Great conversation. So, BK, that's for you. Thank you very much. Ngante, in every home, communication differs depending on the foundation of that relationship. Most of the times, some women and men want to emulate the communication of some other couples, which will only end up in chaos. Some, please, if your own communication that makes your spouse is to cook. So please, if your own communication that makes your spouse is to cook good meal and he or she is happy, great. I think again, already the point he made about the uniqueness of everyone, isn't it? Oh, that was Evelyn. Sorry.
That's Evelyn. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So I believe so. It's a problem because yes, we need to learn. We need to learn the communication skills. How is this working for others? And you now do not have to transfer that 100% to your own home. You now have to make it fit your own situation.
Yes.
To add something, the aspect of romance atrophy is real. Sometimes partners need to do those things that nurture erotic connections, not for the sole purpose of carnal expression, but because of an understanding that it helps brings up to. I mean, I think that is key, isn't it? We need to articulate that in a way that you know. Can you speak to that, BK?
Yes, of course. If you just leave it on the screen, please. And I'd like to go to Evelyn's. I'd like to speak to Evelyn's point as well because I love the point that she raised. It's not pedantic at all. It is very important, to put it mildly. So some partners need to do those things that nurture. Yeah, no, absolutely. So let's go back to the concept of relationships and the inception of relationships. I don't know what it is that makes us, especially the men, think that the very things that we did to bring this relationship to fruition will all of a sudden become redundant once the relationship has started or begun. You see, because if before I got married to you, I would sing a song, I would throw the odd poem, I would tell you I loved you, I'd do this for you, I'd do the other one for you, I'd hold the door out for you, I'd do the grocery when you were tired, I'd bring you breakfast, I'd bring breakfast to your bed. If these are the things that made you look at me and think, I found the man of my dreams, my ability to understand you, my ability to listen to you, to be patient, to have the wherewithal and the fortitude to seek to understand what you were saying, to listen and not to dismiss you. If these are the things that served as manure, if these were deeply ingrained in the fabric of our relationship when we started, what is it that makes me think I should stop just because we're now married? Once I stop, we're not nurturing the relationship anymore. Naturally, it starts going back on itself, as all the other things that serve as chores replace its place, replace it. And if we're not careful, the joy of being together is lost, and it all becomes mundane. So our relationship is reduced to tasks that we perform in order to survive, running around the kids' routines. And the only time we talk is when we're discussing who's taking the kid, who's taking which kid to basketball, and who's taking the other to ballet or swimming. Then what happens when COVID strikes? All these activities are cancelled, put on hold, and you're forced to talk. Then you realize all of a sudden, to the chagrin of the relationship, that you've become strangers, and you wonder what happened. The next thing, you start saying, oh, my wife is boring, oh, my spouse is boring, oh, this other person is more interesting, the grass is greener. Oh, well, if you don't work on it, if you don't nurture it, if you don't tend it, obviously, like a garden, if you don't take out the weeds, put in manure, plant the flowers, it will come to rot. It will disintegrate. And that is the natural state of things. If you don't give attention to something, it will wither and it will die. So that's that for that. Evelyn talked about, or unless you wanted to comment first before I said something
No,
about what Evelyn said.
no, go ahead. I
Okay,
have.
brilliant. So, Evelyn talks in principle about what happens in certain relationships and how some people try to copy from others. Exactly. And this again brings us to the whole concept of keeping up with the Joneses. You're not doing something because that is the way you naturally roll. You're doing it because you want to look like someone else. You're doing it for that external appeal. So you're living your life for others in principle. You're not living your life for yourself. You're living a borrowed life. It comes back to self-understanding, self-appreciation, and understanding why you got into that relationship in the first place, and realizing that those people you envy or admire got there because they took the time to do the work. You can't copy and paste. That is why you can go into one organization and they've got processes, procedures that work so beautifully. But these processes and procedures are layered over the culture of that organization. So if you take that and you lift it up and try to put in some other organization just because it worked in this other organization, if that other organization has got a completely different culture, it is and becomes a recipe for disaster. It's the same thing in the household. Because again, don't forget, the household is the smallest unit of society. That is where leadership begins. That is where our leaders of tomorrow are built.
Great. And I like this. Watching with my colleagues on shift, one said, those bribes, many women know them, but they will just stay quiet for the sake of peace. There are not many men these days.
I think I love Gael already.
So, any comments?
Well, Gael took the words right out of my mouth. That's exactly what I said, right? That is
Well, I mean, the problem here is the women are taking it because they are afraid that they will don't have many men out there, isn't it?
and
So,
and that's the problem. You see, that is no. No, look, I need I so badly need to speak to this.
it's so funny. Okay, BK, go ahead. I'm listening. Well, and I think again, it is. You remember you said women have a capacity to sustain the abuse, isn't it? It's not just about the fact of
Yes.
a scarcity of men. It is also about the capacity, the huge. Call it. They have a large space in their heart. That's why they're able to accommodate this. Okay, I don't think it's so much for want of options. Okay, which is the other side to it, because it is precisely because many think that there are options out there that they just say, hey, I'm done with this thing. After all, what next? So there's kind of a conundrum there whereby, you feel like I'm hanging on because I'm afraid there's nothing outside there. But at the same time, you're really hanging on there because you think that you have a capacity to sustain it, which shouldn't be. Okay, you should be able to communicate that I see through this as being a form of manipulation, which is what we are talking about.
Yes. So I'm with Gael. Stock, lock, and barrel. Hook, line, and sinker. Once more, and it's not one or the other, Lambert. In my opinion, it is both. And we need to stop this. We absolutely need to stop this because this is abuse. I appreciate the fact that Gael has got a sense of humor, and I can see she's laughing about it. Really, I know that if it's one of those situations where you either laugh, in fact, where you have to laugh, because if you don't laugh, you will have to cry. You see, we need to stop abusing our women. We put our women in these desperate corners. We tie them to these desperate corners, and they end up striving, trying to survive instead of thriving. If our women are not thriving, the home cannot be a happy place. The home will never be the place to be. So to come back to your point again, Lambert, you will notice that because of their capacity for patience and tolerance, they take the abuse. And of course, it also goes without saying, where do you go? Most men these days are not exactly the flagship of role models or role modeling. And while women tend to think, and that's where in part you're correct, where while women seem to think there are no good men out there, they tend to see the ones that are the bad one. You tend to hear the ones that are bad and not particularly responsible. You don't get to hear a whole lot from the ones who are responsible because most of them are minding their business. So you're not going to find them in the places where you find regular men, in bars, clubs, and all of that, because these are again they are responsible men. You'll have to go to responsible places to meet and greet these men, and that's where women sometimes have it wrong. The responsible ones don't make a whole lot of noise. Now, having said that, we were talking about the fact that women do pick up on these things and they just tolerate it, and it is so true. Take the example of a woman who sat with her friends in a living room. There's loud music. She just had a baby. And after a while, she leaves the party and goes upstairs. Or she disappears for a while and then she comes back 5, 10 minutes later. And upon being asked where she went, she goes, "Oh, the baby was restless." And everybody goes, how did you know? And I just felt it. So you would notice that women are they are naturally intuitive. They intuit the world as they go along. They just know what it is. They don't know how they know. They just pick up those impulses. It's hard to lie to a woman. You will tell her, "Oh, you were here, you were doing this, you were with," and she just says, "Ah, okay, really, all right," and she doesn't say a thing because she's picking her battle, not because she didn't see through your stupid lie. She did. She picked it up. She just didn't think it was worth her fight. They pick their battles very wisely. So these are people who are like moving antennae. So whatever it is you're doing, she would have seen you coming from a mile because she studies you very well. And they don't have to. The irony is, women don't set out to study you. Just by their interaction, through their interactions with you, they just come to know you and can read you like a book. I haven't got a clue how my wife does it, for crying out loud. Sometimes I try to pretend to be angry. She just laughs at me. I mean, there are times when I'm in a mood. It doesn't last long because obviously you learn not to be in that unresourceful state because it just poisons the whole place. But she can tell the difference, and then she engages, and we start a conversation. Then I tell her what it is that went wrong, or what it is that I'm dealing with, and I make it a point to make sure that I do not shut her down. Although the natural impulse is to go away, take care of stuff, and then come back and talk about it. But I'm beginning to realize that actually talking about it, it's almost like it helps you reconnect with yourself, and then it helps you reconnect with your spouse, and you find the answers because the energy changes. Now, the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious minds, they start communicating when you're in a state, in that harmonious state, when you are in peace and at peace. That energy exchange takes place, and at some point you connect with Mother Nature, which is divine intelligence, and then that wisdom flows. It comes from nowhere, and you realize that you're answering questions which you had asked before and didn't have answers to. It's a bit like what you and I are doing here, Lambert. Notice it is all organic. We come here, we don't plan to have to talk about a particular thing. There's no particular structure. We just trust and we show up and we hope that we will be enough. Besides, we live every day. We're experts. We are men. So we are experts at being men, which means we already have a whole lot in us if we can just trust that if we showed up, what is in us would come out. We would then share it with the world and then get feedback from the world, and then take that feedback, rehash it, and make it into the next session, and then talk to these topics. And how can we do this? Because you and I are not afraid of being vulnerable. We're not afraid of showing up here and having absolutely nothing to talk about, and then telling our guest, "Hey, look, right now we are kind of stuck, but we're going to figure this whole thing out. And we promise we will be there for you. It doesn't matter how bad it looks right now. We will improve. We will make this thing better. And we eventually want to get to a place where everybody feels like they can come here and express themselves and ask questions. And we deal with these things as brothers and sisters and as a community that is intent on growing and making a change. It's all in the mind, and it begins with our mindset."
So I know it's kind of like 1 a.m. your time in the UK. We'll take a couple of more, then I can let you go so that you can rest.
No,
But
that's
here's
fine. I'll prioritize this. I'll prioritize this. Don't worry. That's fine.
Why do African and Black men not put their sons before women like European men do? That's kind of a stereotype, but I mean, what do you think? I don't know how prioritize. How do you put your sons before women? Because I think we talked about this generally before.
Yeah, no, could Mayor just rephrase the question so we know exactly where he's coming from, the perspective? Because when he says put sons before women, like Euro men do, who are these Euro men? So he talked about African and Black men putting their sons before women. What does he mean by putting their sons before women? Mayor, could you just maybe expatiate on that, expound on that, so we get context and where you're coming from? Unless you understand the question, Lambert.
No, I don't. I mean, the thing instead, for me, this is instead counterintuitive, isn't it? We said this some time ago, and there are a couple of things that I wanted to address before this. But remember that generally is too harsh. There is a tendency that when there's a breakdown in communication in a relationship, you mentioned it, the children now become the focus. Women they feel attached to the kids. After all, I have my kids. I don't want to have anything to do with you, isn't it? Now it is about the kids. It's no longer about both. And I remember you called it child abuse, isn't it? Where we start expecting from our kids what our partners should be giving us, which is about the breakdown in the communication. So I thought that maybe that's where he was going to with this, in terms of maybe we don't prioritize the women, so we pay more attention to our sons. And if you go back I think the first edition, we mentioned this in a certain way that, you know, men, the way we grow up, we see success as being one thing, isn't it? Success in the fact that the many women you have, we consider that as being a form of success, and we want to replicate that, and that becomes an issue. So my understanding of what he's trying, I mean, I may be wrong, is maybe when there's a breakdown in communication, which eventually leads to the breakdown in the relationship, we now tend to focus more on the kids and use that. And you just mentioned about COVID breaking down all that. There's no basketball, there's nothing. And we just see how much we hate each other just because now we don't have any other thing to say. I don't know. Maybe that is it. What do you think?
So you see, and this is exactly what we've been talking about. Notice you and I are here trying to second guess what Mayor said, and we've got Mayor right there who can clarify exactly what it is he wanted to say. That is the communication we're talking about.
So while we're waiting for you, Mayor, clarify that Jane says, when does tolerable become intolerable?
When does tolerable become intolerable? Yes, Jane. When there is an impasse, when you realize that it doesn't matter what you do, you can't get through. when a woman usually comes to that place. And I will explain the dynamic because it never changes. You have a scenario where this woman who loves her man discovers that there is something about her man that if she could only tweak would bring out the very best essence of who he is. And so she tries to fix that thing in all excitement. What does the man hear? The man hears, I'm broken. I need to be fixed. But then he's the fixer. So if you're trying to fix the fixer, it means the fixer is not good enough. He's redundant. So he fights back. But in that unresourceful state, the fixer feels he's not good enough. And in a place where where he doesn't feel like he's good enough, he hasn't got power, he hasn't got authority, he doesn't feel respected, so he can neither give nor receive love. So he withholds love. The woman was doing what she was doing. Why? Because she loved her husband and she wanted to connect and express and feel that love. He withholds and withdraws. This love is withheld, so the woman feels rejected. And he doesn't only withhold that, but then he finds faults. He starts finding faults with everything that the woman does. But because the woman believes that he's doing it out of love, because the only time she would correct him is when she loves him, and she would do it out of love, she believes, okay, there must be something wrong. So let her at least make an attempt to be who it is this man wants her to be. So she starts making changes. She's moving away from who she really is in principle. Once she starts doing that, that's the beginning of disaster, because now she doesn't understand that whatever the man is doing, it's a ploy to control. It's not a ploy to make her better. But she's working hard to be everything that this man wants her to be. So she tries and tries until eventually she figures out that, but hang on a minute. Last week I did this. He found faults with it and he said I should do it this way. This week I have done it the way he wanted me to do it. And he's finding faults with it and asking me to do it the way I did it last week. And that's when she flips. Because at that point, she doesn't know who she is anymore. She would have moved so far away from her actual identity. And when she comes to this place, it's total confusion, total chaos. And then the man starts complaining, oh, you used to be this. You're not that anymore. And by the way, why is she not that anymore? She tried to change herself to become whatever thing the man wanted her to become, and she lost herself in the process. And in a bid to find herself, she becomes intolerant and intolerable. She doesn't tolerate what the man throws at her anymore, because she would have lost respect and she would have lost, well, not necessarily love. The love will just wear a different face and show up in a different guise, because when a woman really loves you and you really upset her, that love turns to pain and hate. So it's just different sides of the same coin. The yin and the yang, they go together.
Wow. So something Evelyn says, I think she just got back to her point. Every situation is different. That uniqueness is what is lacking in us women in the diaspora and leading to divorce. My home is not your home. Again, most women, I repeat, women will visit friends, and when they get to their own houses, now they tend to compare two men from two different parents and with two different lifestyles. Example, another husband will not care to cook, dish their food, and etc. But if your own man is not doing it, it doesn't mean he doesn't love you. It is just how you. Yeah. So again, I think the point here about the uniqueness is clear. About each relationship is different. There are things that you can, and I love the analogy you made before, isn't it, of the copying and pasting. You may have the same policies and procedures, but if the culture is lacking and you just copy and paste it, it's definitely going to crumble.
Very
And
much
so
so.
we always have to. There's more to it than what comes in. But Vicky, let's get back to something that we have been talking about a lot. This listening aspect. I believe that the ability to listen, not just, and I mean, to what the other person is not saying, which is something you said that if somebody does not say something, there's no way you can hear what the person is not saying. But I believe that there's a lot that in relationship is not understood because of prejudices, because the other person is not listening, both actively and passively, isn't it? And you go away, you are interpreting things that are not there, especially for us men, when we lose control or we think that we have lost control of a situation, then we erect these barriers, and before we know it, the entire edifice is gone. How do we start teaching ourselves how to listen to our partners?
That's a beautiful question. And since we're talking about men, I would like the car analogy. We all drive cars. And you'll notice that for the most part, while some men are car enthusiasts, so they will know exactly what's happening under the hood, how the engine works, what it does to get the car moving, all the technical aspects of your engine. You notice that in order to drive a car, you don't need to know how any of that works. You just need to know how to steer, how to shift stick, and how to push on the pedals to get the car to do what it is you want it to do. Or if it's automatic, it's even easier. So what does that tell you? When you know where you're going, everything else falls in place. When you don't know where you're going and you can't drive, then you do random things and that whole vehicle crumbles. How do I relate this to the whole question of listening? If you are listening with an intent to build, then patience automatically kicks in. I'll say that again. If you're listening with an intent, with the intention of building, then you notice the energy that you bring, and this is where it kind of speaks as well to nonverbal communication. The energy that you bring will be picked up. It makes it easier for the person you're engaging to be present. And that presence allows for that energy to exchange, that energy exchange between the two of you to happen. So your question was, how do we get ourselves to a point where we actually start active listening? Was that the question?
Absolutely.
Exactly. So it all comes down to our intent. Why are we in the conversation? You see, because your reason for being in the conversation will determine your disposition. If you are there because you want to communicate and you want to understand what is wrong because you want to build your household, or you want to empower your spouse to ensure that she has everything to be the boss that she is, because any man who doesn't understand that the woman is the boss in the house has still got a lot to learn. If the woman is not happy, that whole place is a house. It only becomes a home when the woman takes control. By and large, generally speaking, obviously, again, because of that ability to nurture. So if you come into a conversation, stop at the door, check yourself at the door, keep your ego at the door, keep your titles at the door, keep your bank account, especially if you are the one running the show financially, keep that at the door and walk in naked, with the understanding that you're dealing with an equal who may respect you, who may take what you decide as the final word or say if there is an impasse, and who will lead in areas where she is capable, while you lead in areas where you're more capable. And if there's an impasse in the conversations, when you start dialogue, if there's an impasse and you're not sure, you're both at odds, go right or go left, then somebody has to make the call. And you, as the man, you may have the honors to make that call. But both of you understand that it's just because you need to make a decision. And obviously, you can then revisit subject to the outcome of that decision. If you get into an engagement with that mindset, there's absolutely no way that conversation will go wrong. But if you come into that engagement with the mindset and the intent to have your way, that already is a recipe for disaster, because you don't listen to understand, you listen to speak and to counteract if what the other person is saying is not in line with where you're going. So that whole manipulation machine kicks in and it runs full steam, full throttle, firing on all cylinders. So that is what we want to avoid at all costs. You don't want to come into a conversation with an agenda if the purpose of the conversation is to seek and to reach consensus. I hope I answered the question.
Perfectly. You don't want to come into a conversation with an agenda, which has been the main thing that we have been talking about today. Men tend to manipulate a lot, isn't it, in what we say and all that. And I know that we have just been talking about this, and something, how you respond demonstrates how well you have been listening, how you respond. And that's what you said, the intent brings a certain disposition, a certain energy. You want to summarize what the person is saying, you want to validate, you want to empathize. This is, I mean, we can talk about this whole thing of communication forever. And I'm sure we are going to continue having this. Let me take this last comment from Jude, then I'll give you an opportunity of closing remarks. Relationships, at least the ones people tend to enjoy the most, are dynamic and fluid, shifting over time, embracing rather than resisting change. If you get stuck in the oppressive system bequeathed by traditional cultural precepts, you'll be buried by them. You'll be buried with them. Chinua Achebe got it right. The world is like a mask dancing. I think that's a great way. I mean, again, our major topic today of communication, you put it so well about being a dance. And if we don't engage in that dance, we are going to miss a lot. BK, thank you very much for your insights. Thank you for staying up late today to get us through this. Any last words?
Sure. So I like Jude's last remark. It's really beautiful and it's an amazing way to close the conversation today. You will realize again, just to add to that, we talk about communication being like music, and obviously a dance. If you've got a dance, then obviously you've got that music, and that music changes, that music evolves. The terrain will change at all time. Changing circumstances will predispose us to have to change in order to adapt. So if we do not dance to the tune of the music, then at best we will dance out of tune. And if we're dancing out of tune, it will be uncomfortable. And that is how stress, duress, and distress begins, which then becomes what we call frustration, suffering, and eventually depression. So ultimately, the overarching thing we're trying to avoid here, we are combating depression. If we can get ourselves to a place where we understand the unions and the relationships, the engagements that we invest in and why, where we're going with them, and we're fulfilled by them, then we will be so consumed by what we're doing. We would be so fulfilled in what we're doing. The people, the places, the circumstances, and whatever else that we relate with, that there will be no time whatsoever for us to be depressed. Do you think that there's anything like pure incompatibility in a relationship? Absolutely not. There's no such thing as pure incompatibility. There is something as pure stubbornness. Basil, when somebody decides to be stuck in their way because they are stuck in a rut and they are feeling extremely vulnerable, they don't want to predispose themselves to change. They don't have that inclination. Everything has to be done in their way. It's obviously the insecurities and the baggage that they bring into a relationship. You see, because no two people are so diametrically opposite. You have people who are recalcitrant, you have people who are stubborn, you have people who are stuck in their ways. Because we are all energy, we are all one by and large. And the thing that defines us all is love. Because when you become love and you can impersonate love, guess what? You become patient. With patience, you will understand. If you are patient enough, there is no way you would have a conflict, because all misunderstandings automatically take the back seat. With patience, you will listen keenly, you will get feedback, you will understand what has been said, you will check that understanding, then you will respond. So there's a difference between responding and reacting. Reacting means you punch me, I punch you right back. I don't stop to ask questions, and I don't take hostages. Responding means you punch me, and I go, Basil, this is not you. What's going on? Is everything okay? Are you having a bad day? And the next thing is you will go, hey, Ken, BK, I'm sorry. I don't know what came over me today. Or the better example would be that irate client who comes and they spray you with obscenities. You look at them, you smile, you go something like, "Hey Basil, I'm not sure what's up, but I can tell you're having a pretty bad day, and I know it's not me, but hey, we can do this. We can handle this. We can deal with this situation. Tell me, how can I help?" And then I shut up. Notice how disarmed you are, Basil. Incompatibility would be when I come from a place of reacting, not from a place of responding. You see, because any behavior that is incontrovertible, any behavior that is lacking, any behavior which is questionable is coming from a place of fear, is coming from a place of control. And once I understand that, I just realize it is a cry for help. So if two people find themselves in a relationship, it simply means at some point they both saw value and valor in one another. And then control set in. One person starts trying to control the other. And so to come back to your thing, is there any such thing as pure incompatibility? Yes. If two people are stuck up, or one person is completely stuck up, is not open to growth, is not dynamic, and just wants things done their way because they said so, in which case they ultimately are the problem. We will not blame incompatibility. We will blame someone's inability to grow or to want to learn.
Thank you so much, BK. And I wanted to acknowledge Gael. Let's put our hands together. Let's put our hands up. Both are manipulative, but they should always be proportionate. Tongue, situation, and limit. Don't exaggerate. Yes, I think so. I mean, today we are focusing on the man, isn't it? How men manipulate. I think women also manipulate men similarly. I think so. I guess that is the point you are making. And she says, manipulation should be proportionate to the situation. Make man not turn the order to a mumu, you'll be caught and the price will be very costly. So again, I want to thank you all. Thank all those who were present. Evelyn, I want to thank Ndiashe Gante, Father Basil Sede, Jude Agua Ozugen, Gael, Evelyn Chong, Eric Akinji, and many others. I want to say thank you for being with us this evening. It's been great. And I hope we all are learning. We are able to help each other and grow. His Father Basil says, immense thanks, BK and Lambert. So next week is going to be the explosive one. We touched a lot today about sex. Next week, we are going to be talking about men and sex, and you don't want to miss that. So thank you. This is the third session. And like we said, we are dedicating this year to talk about men and mental health. And we are dealing specifically with relationships. We have tackled a couple of things, but next week we want to go on to the big one, men and sex. Thank you all very much. Stay warm. It's been very cold here. And thank you, BK, for staying up late. Gael is at work. She also is in the UK. So see you all next week. Same time, same date. I think we're going to change to 5 p.m. next week. BK, 5 p.m. so that you can, at least let's give you some time. So next Monday, we have this series on men every Monday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which should be 10 p.m. GMT, or 11 p.m. or 10 p.m. 10 p.m. GMT, and I think it's 11 p.m. in Cameroon. I shall be on again this week on Wednesday for our series on African African Immigrants and African Development with Sir Okpa, and I'm hoping to have something on Friday on immigration. Until then, see you, thanks, and have a good evening.